Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Always a pleasure to have our great friend James Herson on. It's been a while when we're talking about culture, law, society. It's so refreshing to hear your words of wisdom, sir. Welcome back to Idaho.
Oh, great to be with you. How are you?
As I like to say, thankfully, still employed. We look at the, by the way, are you still in California?
Yes, I am. Yes. I try to, stay away from Los Angeles as many days as I can, but I'm forced. I work in that community, so I have to go in there and interface with the crazies. So it's just the way it is.
Well, most of your people are moving to Idaho, so I just wondered if you were coming here.
Well, that kind of scares me because I'm concerned if Californians keep coming to Idaho, they're going to turn it blue.
Indeed. What's the state culturally in America today? Where are we?
Well, oh boy, what a question. It's a fundamental question. I think in the wake of the tragic, shootings, so-called mass shootings, people desire a simple explanation, and it's just a human nature. So they want to find one thing, something we can do that will stop it. And the problem is it's not simple. Just like when you talk about where we stand with our culture is not simple, but I think it's good to reach into the question of why those take place. When you look back 20 or 30 years, we had just as many guns. We had people with mental health problems. We had young people that committed crimes. We called them juvenile delinquents. But we didn't have people who wanted to go into a public place with a firearm or with any weapon and take out as many people as possible. So what's the difference? Well, I think there's many variables, but I do think some of the most significant have to do with the fact that, first of all, we look at these people and they're all male, almost all male, and at least in the last few decades, they've all been male. And we have a political machine that incentivizes fatherless households. So we have a whole generation of males being raised. This is different, being raised without a father. And every civilization has a rite of passage, particularly for males, in a time where you're not supposed to talk about the differences between men and women. That, to me, is a significant difference that we have to discuss. Men have implanted within them a warrior. In my view, it's by an intelligent designer. If that warrior instinct is not channeled through a moral framework, we get what we have in society. You add to that fatherless families, you add to that taking the source of morality, God, out of the public square, out of schools, out of, people who if they had their way, we would never be able to mention God in any context. And so the moral framework, which emanates from religious institutions and people of faith, has been essentially removed from a lot of institutions in our society. Then you add an overlay of social media, 24-hour cable, video games, and you have basically a formula for a degraded culture. And then, of course, add the violence that's just taken for granted in the media, the hypocrisy of these Hollywood producers that, a major studio was going to greenlight a film featuring the slaughter of people for their political beliefs. So I'd say the state of our culture is horrible, and in a crisis. And the kinds of answers that the elites tell us that we should have are a formula for greater crisis and more disaster.
James Herson joining us, Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio, talking culture. one of the things that I love speaking to you about or listening to what you have to say is, the traditional America that has been replaced, the traditional role of the genders in Western civilization that has been replaced. Why are we replacing men with women?
Yeah. It's really, it's not funny. I have to, and it's not just women, we now have this mythology being forced on us, and that we're not supposed to acknowledge from the people who say they care about science. We're not supposed to acknowledge the science of genetics, the science of chromosomes, and the science of gender. And we're supposed to now raise children with the myth of arbitrary gender. Gender is not what you're born with. Gender is what you happen to feel like on any particular time, according to the mythological societal norms of our time, which leads to these crazy, searches for pronouns and new ways to describe gender, like whether you're binary or non-binary. And looking at our pop culture, where in fact we force, like a shoehorn, the square peg in a round hole, and reboot movies that were male with females and watch them bomb. And we live in a time where Thor, the Thunder God, is going to be a woman, or James Bond, 007, is going to be a woman. And of course, it won't be long before we have to have a non-binary cross-dressing superhero in our Marvel universe. So it's, to me, it's starting to sort of boomerang on the left. There are young women who are athletes who never found themselves being involved with politics, who now look over their shoulder and they have no chance to compete because some guy wearing rouge claims to be a woman today and is engaging in sports where someone with an XY chromosome has a distinct advantage. We remember a time in the Olympics where the East German swimmers looked a little suspicious, like they had a 5 o'clock shadow. That was because they were messing around with hormones and cheating. But now we have people who said it's okay to cheat, even though you're a man biologically, but, we're going to, in the name of compassion, allow you to pretend you're a woman and destroy the athletic careers of young women. So, yes, it's an insane time, and I have to say, anecdotally, I know some good-hearted parents who are now they're taking this to heart, and they don't want to, push gender on their children. So they have young boys who are wearing dresses, and they have young girls who are donning armor. And, I suppose if it's a stage that they're going through, that's okay. But I remember a time where we thought it was a treasure in society that kids who were preschool age had innocence, that maybe they shouldn't even be thinking about sexual proclivities. But, the agenda-driven left wants to force-feed preschoolers with this mythology about gender, to the point where we now have libraries where we have men dressing as women reading stories to young preschoolers with an agenda, in other words, making these kids aware of sexual preferences and what we used to consider abnormal behavior. I mean, they're supposed to accept that. And it's a propaganda, agenda-driven campaign that undermines the fabric of civilization.
James, we've got about 3 minutes left here, and I want to give them to you before we take our first break here on KIDO Talk Radio. James Herson joining us. Kevin Miller in the morning. How did we lose the cultural war?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't think the culture war is over. I think the culture war continues to be fought. I think what has happened, though, is that those that care, when you say we, I think you're referring to that, those of us that care about traditional values have allowed people who want to destroy those values to take over some very important institutions. It's very obvious that the mainstream media has been completely taken over. The pop culture center of Hollywood has been completely taken over. The Silicon Valley pretty much is taken over. And academia, from preschool to university, has been, with rare exceptions, taken over. The amazing thing is, with the destructive left controlling all of those institutions, we still see traditional values alive and well in the heartland, in places like Idaho, in places that the elites on the left coast and the East Coast call flyover country. It's alive and well. And if it weren't, we wouldn't have the incredible voluntary military that we enjoy. People wouldn't, enlist and want to serve their nation the way not all young people, but many young people do. I don't think, young members of Antifa are standing in line to join the Marines, with maybe rare exceptions. And so, I think it's because there's certain institutions, the family, the traditional family, which is still alive and well in most of the country, religious institutions and private schools and homeschooling, and, the biggest, the communities that exist more so outside of the urban areas. I mean, if we look at our urban areas, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Baltimore, Detroit, these are horrible cesspools of homelessness, crime, trash, dirt. The result of the kind of policies that the Democrats running for president want to inflict on the whole country. And so it's a miracle, but I think it's because deep within the heart of people that live in this country, there still resonates this incredible desire for things that the media hates and Hollywood hates and academia hates. And obviously, the manifestation of that miracle is sitting in the White House. Because if the left had their way, that's part of the reason they're so angry.
Well, and
they control all the levers and,
sure,
and they can't win.
More with our great friend James Herson next. JamesHerson.com. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Always a privilege to wake up on the right side. KIDO Talk Radio and the KIDO Talk Radio app. James Herson joining us once again. Culture, law, business analysis right here. JamesHerson.com. Check him out today. So is there any hope? We're hearing these independent movies where people will take on a subject that's near and dear to the heartland, and all of a sudden, James, boom, it's a blockbuster, and yet the media does not acknowledge movies of faith or really anything of faith making a big difference that people seem to want.
Yeah, that's a very good point. The two most profitable genres in Hollywood, when I say most profitable, with the largest profit margin, because in other words, the biggest bang for the buck for the investors are faith-based movies and horror movies, and both of which can be produced compared to, Hollywood blockbusters for a relatively low cost. And so, some of the studios, the executives in their mercenary desire to make a profit have set up faith-based divisions, but, they're staffed by people who live in the Hollywood bubble who wouldn't understand what a faith-oriented movie really is. And so most of these films, if they deal with subjects, in other words, they touch on being pro-life, or they take religion seriously, or they focus on traditional family values and things like that, they end up getting financed outside of the Hollywood infrastructure, much like Mel Gibson had to finance his own movie when he did The Passion of the Christ, much like The Blind Side had to be financed through basically Federal Express money from the son of the owner of Federal Express, and Sandra Bullock taking a hit on her salary. And so it's usually kind of creative ways of going around Hollywood, which has shown its ability to just be completely disconnected, not only from the country, but from the sensibilities of the moment, when Hollywood, and not just an independent film, a major studio, probably the second largest in the world, Universal Studios, that controls theme parks, is, by the way, NBC Universal, a conglomerate, green-lighted a film called The Hunt, which was ostensibly about leftist elites hunting down and slaughtering Trump supporters. Now, can you just imagine a boardroom in Hollywood where somebody brings up this idea and executives from Universal Studios say, oh, that sounds good. Let's put together a budget. It cost them about $20 million to do that horrible film. They hired professional screenwriters like the guy who wrote the television show Lost. They had cast it with Oscar-winning actress Hilary Swank and Oscar-nominated actress Amy Madigan. And these people agreed, oh, sure, we'll do a film about slaughtering people for their political beliefs. That really shows. Now, they were forced to pull it after enough people started saying, are you crazy, after mass shootings? But if the mass shootings hadn't happened, that film would have come out, and it will come out. They're just waiting for it. They're not going to just lose $20 million just for fun here. They just pulled it temporarily. But the fact that they said yes to that film says more about the state of Hollywood than almost anything I could talk about, and how out of it they are. And that's why the faith-based films that you mentioned have to be pushed and financed by people who aren't generally in the big studios, or aren't generally people who normally finance films.
Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Traffic and weather together. Good morning, Dave. And back again with our great friend James Herson, jamesherson.com. We've got about 3.5 minutes left. James, I'd love for you to give us your pathway to restoring, making America, traditional America, hip, considering the media, public enemy number one, or is it?
Well, we live in a state where I guess the good news is the media has sunk to such low levels that they have no credibility anymore. When I say they, I'm talking about the mainstream media. I'm particularly talking about the metropolitan mainstream media. So the New York Times, for example, it just bears no resemblance to the New York Times of the past. It is no longer a news organization. It's an organization that seeks a specific agenda. And it's very obvious to people, particularly the 63 million people who supported Donald Trump, that CNN and MSNBC have abandoned journalism. The MSNBC is basically a tinfoil hat conspiracy theory network that spent 2 years pretending that the myth of Russian collusion was a reality. And even when forced to kind of move on to a different mythology, which is white supremacy and racism tied in with people that support the president, they wouldn't admit that they had, in fact, lied to the people. And of course, CNN is just, ridiculous with Don Lemon and Fredo Cuomo. So I think the good news is that most people now, they don't even view the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, the broadcast networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, they don't view them as credible sources. And so what do people do? Well, they utilize on their end both social media and internet sites and talk radio shows like yours, and they carefully cultivate their own sources. And that's the way I think we have to be. We have to be very discerning when we go out and seek the truth. I think we're very fortunate that we have elected officials, people like Devin Nunes and Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz, who are in positions of power, who seem to be people that care about the truth and try to go after it. I also believe our new Attorney General, William Barr, who was announced, I can't think of a source of media that's aroused more skepticism than the death of Jeffrey Epstein, the child predator defendant. And William Barr seems to be turning over everything to try to get past the official story and find out what happened. That's very different than what we've seen in the past. So I think we have to support people who are pursuing the truth. We have to cultivate special sources and be discerning, and we have to be very careful what our families are exposed to. We all know that Silicon Valley is also not to be trusted, and Google searches, Twitter feeds, and Facebook feeds are being regulated and edited by people who support basically leftist thinking and hate conservative or traditional thinking. So I guess if we go into it forearmed and we understand it, maybe we can save our mind and not let it get brainwashed.
James Herson, we always appreciate you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Kevin. God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you again. Have a great day.
Right, you too now.
Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Coming up next, I'm just going to share with you some thoughts on what James Herson had to say. You're listening to Kevin Miller on KIDO Talk Radio. KIDO Talk Radio, Kevin Miller in the morning. Thank you all for joining us. Remember, I wish they paid me for the amount of times I say the call letters, right? I know what you mean. You're going, oh my gosh, he's not going to say the call letters. No, don't worry about that. But this KIDO Talk Radio app is pretty neat. Basically, you just go to the App Store, you go to Google Play, and you get it for free. Now, many people go, hey, get our app. It's great. It's fun. It's exciting. And some people, and I try to personally avoid this, some people talk at you. For me, I like to talk with you. So we would like to earn, that's right, earn that valuable real estate. Now, maybe you're like Mrs. Miller and you have a ton of stuff on your phone and you have files and you're organized and you know what you're doing with your phone. But if you're like me, well, I don't like all these things on my phone. And then, when when you have an app think, hey, I stubbed my toe, here's an app. Hey, and really that's primarily, I think, radio stations trying to get people to respond, and God bless them for that. But when we ask permission to go on your phone, we understand that we're guests, we're visitors. So we're going to earn that real estate. And KIDO Talk Radio app, you can take it anywhere. It's great. It's wonderful. Congressman Fulcher has talked about using it in Washington, D.C., and others have used it around the world. So, all right, enough about the app. Coming up, we're going to take a look at just some of the crazy presidential candidates. And we'll, it is the silly season when we're thinking about this, right? Everybody going back and forth on these things with what they're going to promise. And it's kind of like The Office on steroids when you think about these folks, except they legitimately want to run the country, right? If you've read books on leadership, or like me and the president, just watch the shows, leadership, right? Leadership is this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. Now, whether it was the Republicans almost 4 years ago, actually 4 years ago, or the Democrats now, it's not leadership. It's, hey, what can I do for you? You don't like this person? We'll get them banned. You don't like that person? We'll get we'll get them banned. We'll pander. Since when has leadership become pandering? Maybe some of us have missed it the whole time. So, for entertainment purposes only, my good friend, young Jacob, we're ready to go on the Commodore 64. Is fired up. Hopefully, the computer is awake here. And let's just take a listen and react to some of the things that our presidential candidates on the Democratic side have said.
Let's take it back. I refuse to wait any longer. Take it back now. This is America.
Wow. Take America back from everybody who is wanting to make America great again. Got to give it to Joe. He had a lot of gaffes and still will continue to have a lot of gaffes, and maybe that's not a big deal. You know, recently we broke down the Democratic presidential candidates, and in a past life, I covered politics, and I'm sure you feel the same way. Maybe you don't. Maybe you get your political fix by us, and that's a big responsibility. But I used to cover politics like many people cover BSU, like sports. You know, over the weekend, a couple weeks ago, I watched the Iowa State Fair, watching the candidates work the room, talk about issues, that sort of thing. I found it compelling. So Joe Biden, possibly the greatest threat to President Trump, because you have a lot of squishy Republicans, and you look, I don't want to insult anybody. You have people, maybe in this state, maybe in this country, maybe in Utah, that aren't down with President Trump because of his language, because of his lifestyle, because of the way he does things. They like what Trump has brought. They like what Trump has brought as far as the economy, as far as making America great again. They just don't like him. They don't like the style. And Donald Trump, as Tea Party Bob will tell you, anybody that's lived east of the Great River, especially in New York or in the Northeast, those folks are very prickly. They're very opinionated. Whether it's in Boston, New York, they're not going to hold back. They don't care about your feelings. People in the West, more considerate. People in the West, more laid back. People in the West, more passive. Nothing wrong with that. Just a different style. Donald Trump rubs people the wrong way. So you bring in Joe Biden. Joe Biden sometimes will insult people, but not to the level of a Kamala Harris, not to the level of a crazy Bernie, not to the level that we've known time in and time out. So Biden will come in, and he's a lib, he's a Democrat that we can all work with. And what concerns me is you're going to have some Republicans that are going to go, hey, man, Biden's not so bad. He's going to keep the loony left at bay. He's going to keep the loony left out of front, and he's not going to have to worry about things, right? Or will he? Here's more of Uncle Joe talking about the America that he would like, taking America back. And you really wonder, is that the appropriate message? I mean, come on, Joe. Can't you do better than that? By the way, before we get to Joe Biden, here's the president taking shots at his favorite punching bag.
Joe Biden is not playing with a full deck. This is not somebody you could have as your president. But if he got the nomination, I'd be thrilled.
Well, there you have it. So on one hand, you know, the president showing what made him a WWE Hall of Famer.
Joe Biden is not playing with a full deck. This is not somebody you could have as your president. But if he got the nomination, I'd be thrilled.
Joe Biden saying,
let's take it back. I refuse to wait any longer. Take it back now. This is America.
There you have it. This is America. Well, thankfully, we understand about that, and we appreciate that.
I can make sure that every single solitary person in the country has adequate health insurance. Build on Obamacare. Make sure it has a public option.
Man, that is a disaster. That is a disaster when you're thinking, we're going to build on Obamacare. That was the worst thing that ever happened, wasn't it? Now, for some people, I have a friend of mine, does very well on Obamacare, has benefited him greatly. But really what we've done with Obamacare is we've transferred the control of who gets to decide who lives and who dies from the greedy, grubby private industry to the greedy, grubby government officials. And really, they've outsourced that to the insurance companies, right? They've outsourced that to the insurance companies, and the insurance companies decide whether or not at 65 you can get treated for heart disease. Whether at 75 you've got a few years left to live. Doesn't the Lord determine that as opposed to an insurance company? Think about that as we're hearing from politicians. And unfortunately, the Republicans, what have they done when it comes to reforming, repealing, replacing Obamacare? Not a lot. My favorite thing was, well, we've got a plan. Well, that's good news. What's the plan? It's going to make it worse. Wait a minute. So when I go to the hospital or I go to the emergency room and they haul me in, and the first thing the compassionate medical professionals say, not my good friend Jeremy, but just about everybody else, they say, well, Fatty, you sit over there. Well, they don't say Fatty, but I say that for entertainment purposes only, right? They say, you sit over there and give me your insurance card. What's your copay? Well, before we treat you, now maybe this doesn't happen, but for entertainment purposes only, and this is my impression, they run the card, and the card better work or else, little buddy. To me, that's not care. To me, that's profit. That's marketing. That's margins. And we see it around, don't we? We see it just about everywhere. So when we take a look at Democrats, and by the way, is it me or do they just seem very angry? For entertainment purposes only, here is Crazy Bernie.
In this unprecedented moment in American history, we need an unprecedented grassroots movement. Join our effort and let us reclaim American democracy and a government that works for all people.
Is it me or have Bernie and Biden come up with similar talking points? Take America back. Larry David does such the best Bernie Sanders. Taking it back from whom? And by the way, Bernie, your beloved Democratic Party, they don't like you. They're not down with Bernie. What are they down with? Maybe Kamala, maybe Joe, maybe Elizabeth Warren, but not lovable Bernie. One thing you can say about Bernie Sanders, he's a true believer. I've known Bernie Sanders for years. Personally, no. Living in New Hampshire back in the day, he was the mayor of Burlington, Vermont before he ran for the House. He was a socialist then. Bernie has distinct beliefs. And the Democratic Party, the last thing they want, and their accolades in the press, is another Bernie Sanders getting to the nomination, getting close to the nomination to make sure that it just ruins their momentum. I would say, frankly, I'd be worried about Bernie more than I'd be worried about Biden. Bernie brings out the passion. Bernie brings out the true believers. And a Trump-Sanders debate would be one for the ages. And quite frankly, I understand people, we want young people, but, Bernie looks weathered. I don't really trust a leader that doesn't look weathered, that doesn't have a receding hairline, that, doesn't have a few wrinkles, right? That's the sign of credible leadership, a receding hairline and some wrinkles, and maybe a protruding waistline. Never trust a thin young leader. And again, I'm saying that in jest. We are just rolling right here. Appreciate you joining us. By the way, Kevin Miller in the morning. Don't forget the Spirit of Boise Balloon Classic next week, brought to you by our friends at CapEd Credit Union. You're listening to Kevin Miller on KIDO Talk Radio. Boy, where does the time go? So blessed to be with you. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Here are some crazy things going on, right? And maybe you heard about this, maybe you didn't. But would you buy gun insurance? Right. You have homeowners insurance, life insurance, health insurance, welfare insurance, but gun insurance. The mayor of San Jose, California, wants to require all gun owners to carry liability insurance or pay a fee that would go towards the public cost of gun violence. Why do we continue to vilify law-abiding citizens? I don't get it. Mayor Sam Liccardo, looks good to me, proposed the ordinance last week, and if passed, would require the nation's first requirement of its nature. In other words, it would be the first. Now, our friends in the liberal hubs of Massachusetts and New York are also considering the same type of legislation. Now, the San Jose proposal comes after the tragic mass shootings in Dayton, Ohio, El Paso, Texas, and Gilroy, California, that have left 3 people dead and more than 12 injured. The San Jose proposal reads that the insurance could cover the accidental discharge of a gun and for anyone who steals or borrows a gun. Doesn't this sound crazy? Law enforcement agencies would not be required to carry the insurance. If you don't purchase liability insurance and own a gun, you'll pay a fee instead to help cover the public cost of gun violence. Well, what happens if there's no gun violence for years? What happens if there's no gun violence forever? Where does that money go? Kind of like what happens with the gas tax money. You remember that? Hey, Idaho, we're going to fix the roads, right? We're going to fix the roads, and we're going to use the money we're going to get the money from raising your gas tax, right? So trust me, I'm going to raise it by 5 cents, and the roads here are going to be perfect. How's that working out for you? How's that working out for you when you're talking about this issue? You know what I mean? So the roads are still challenging here, right? So why should we trust these people? I don't get it. I don't get it indeed. All right, Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Let's get you to work safely and on time. Good morning, Dave. Blessed to be with you as we move along. So we'll get back to some of these other crazy stories. Here's someone who we should keep our eye on.
We can make this government work for all of America. Let's do this, Democrats. Dream big, fight hard, let's win.
There we have it, Elizabeth Warren. She sounds excited. One more time.
My name is Elizabeth Warren, and I'm running for president.
Okay, I'm Vladimir Putin. I was going to call myself Joe Putin. I'm Joe Putin, and all of a sudden I get a phone call because, I don't know, I've invaded the Ukraine. I don't know, I've done something else. I just don't know. And I get a call from the leader of the United States of America who sounds like this.
We can make this government work for all of America. Let's do this, Democrats. Dream big, fight hard, let's win.
Your voice goes there, Senator Warren. I know all about that. So we've covered some of the big contenders. One that continues to be the belle of the ball of the media, Kamala Harris. Senator Harris, former Attorney General, senator from California. She's mad about the ICE raids and says it's a campaign of terror.
This administration has directed DHS to conduct these raids as part of what I believe is this administration's campaign of terror.
Okay, we'll get back to that in a minute, but the president saying this about race.
For them to throw out the race word again, racist, that's all they use to anybody. They call Nancy Pelosi a racist. She's not a racist. They call anybody a racist when they run out of cards.
There you have it. All right, let's get to Kamala Harris. Kamala had her moment by kneecapping Sleepy Joe Biden. And by the way, this happened, a couple months ago. Shame on the Biden people for not preparing Joe to get kneecapped. He is the front runner. He is the guy with all the money. He's got nothing to gain by, having a poor debate performance. Biden has to understand, look, it's about my dream finally. What is it, the fourth time he's run for the presidency? And by the way, sidebar here, Your Honor. Do we have the sidebar bell? Let me see if I can get this here. Sidebar, Your Honor. At the age of 76 or 77, let's hope most of us, and I hope that you're retired, and if it's your choice to be retired, God bless you. God bless everybody. And if you're still working and you don't want to work, I'm sorry. I'm not judging you. I'll be working into my 70s. Why? Well, it's just the mistakes we make in life, right? Probably, well, regardless of that, at that age, whether you have 20 more years, 5 more years, 5 more months, 5 more minutes, in my opinion, Joe Biden is selfish. Well, the country needs me. I don't think the country needs you. The country, just like a job, as much as we try to think that we're indispensable, look, they fired Michael Jordan. If you don't know that reference, Google it. People that have been at the top have been fired. The organization moves on. It's never the same, and sometimes organizations fall and fail after the founder, the decision maker, the influencer leaves. But man, life goes on. And if I'm Joe Biden and my kids and myself have made a ton of money, and even if you haven't made a ton of money, what's the joy of having children, grandchildren, probably great-grandchildren, if you're not enjoying them? Look, the allure of being the president, yeah. But dude, you were vice president. Isn't that enough? Isn't that enough with all of us? Thankfully, through changes that have happened to me in my 10 years with you, I've grown exponentially as a person. Maybe not so much as the character that I was when I came to you 10 years ago, but I see, and you see, the real people see the value of going to a ball game, going to a dance recital, telling that special person you made a difference. Let's see that from our politicians, not the contrived acts that we continue to see on television. Anyway, didn't get to be all sappy with you, but I love you. I appreciate you. It's a blessing to be with you each and every morning. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio.